Well, Matt, you're back on the pod, and I couldn't be more excited. So thanks
Oh,
for being here.
absolutely. I wouldn't have missed out.
So we were just talking a little bit offline about our topic for today. I'm super excited to get into this with you because um, it's just the hot topic right now in the running community. We're going to talk all about time off, rest and
hmm
recovery, rest periods, base training, and where an off season fits into all of that, and what an off season actually means to you. And I think you're a fantastic person to discuss this with because not only are you a running coach, but you're a strength coach and you're in the trenches. You just ran 2:34:35 at the Berlin Marathon, which I understand to be a PR,
It,
Matt, though perhaps not exactly where you were hoping for. But regardless,
Thank you.
congratulations.
It was, if anyone hasn't, you should give Berlin Marathon a shot. It is beautiful. The city is fantastic. I met some great people out there. The race is well orchestrated. It's flat and it's fast. Oh, I feel like even the road is a little soft. Like that place is meant for running. But it was squeezed a few seconds out of that PR. Was hoping for a little bit more, but a PR is a PR is a PR. So we take that and actually looking at things that you talk about. If I look at the cycle, it was a huge PR cycle for me. We're like holding consistent mileage. I think we had like three back-to-back 400 plus mile months of like
Wow.
just stacking big miles, feeling good with like the amount of quality and volume in there, like excited to take all that fitness and just keep building it, making it a stepping stone onto the next one.
Yeah, well, I had such a fun conversation with you about a year ago talking about high mileage running, how you put together a 140-mile week, which is sort of just a fun case study. And one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you back on to discuss off seasons is because a little birdie came on my shoulder the other day and told me that you took about a month off after Berlin. And I understand it to be about maybe 3 weeks
hmm
or so, but I want to talk about this idea of an off season, what it actually is. I struggle with this because, in all of my cross country and track experience in high school and college, I actually never had a coach use the term off season. And I looked through Jack Daniel's running formula, no mention of off season. USA Track and Field coaching curriculum book that I have, no mention of off season. And so everyone's talking about this new buzzword of off season, but it's not really formally included in any sort of running education. So when you finish up a season, Matt, and you're thinking about time off, give us a little bit of a 30,000-foot view of why did you take all that time off after the marathon? I mean, why not a week? Why not 4 weeks? Why not 6 weeks? What's your thinking there? And then, maybe at a very high level, what is your definition of off season?
Really good way to look at it. Well, I love taking a little bit of time off. We were talking earlier. I fall into the category we would call like a 48 weeker. We've got 52 weeks in a year. I'm usually running for 48 weeks out of that year. I tend to have like two big races a year. I'm a marathoner, so that's kind of the max you can hit. Professionals are able to sort of toe that line a little bit more. Obviously, they have different factors going on. They're able to push that a little bit more, but I tend to have two big races a year that I really try to peak for, and then after that peak, I take a little time off just to allow me to catch up, allow my body to process all the work that I just did. Um, if I've had anything sort of pick up throughout the cycle, allows it to settle down, give me a chance to really just kind of catch up from all that work that I did. So for this year, I took time after Berlin. I took a really long block after CIM this last year. I had a challenging CIM and mentally more than I think than physically. Like physically I was a little burnt, but mentally I really needed a break going into the year. So from I've been running consistently since about, golly, what is that? Like first week of February was about when like it wasn't like the Berlin build, but I've been having a steady amount of mileage since February. That is a long, heavy block of of big miles. And I had a little bit of a peek as into Boulder, which was in May of that year. This year, what am I saying that year? May of this year, and then I think I maybe took 2 days after that as like a little extra rest. But then following Memorial Day, it was go time. Um, so for me, this was a bit longer than most of my normal builds. I find that with myself, but with also anybody who's ran a couple marathons, you can get into marathon specific shape pretty quickly as long as you maintain a pretty good base of fitness. Like the marathon's no different than any other race. It's like what are the specific demands of the distance? So for the marathon, let's get really efficient at running one pace ish for a really long time. Um, so to do that, like anywhere like 10 to 12 weeks, you can really get into like a good marathon specific build. So for this one, this ended up just being a lot longer of a build for me, and I felt, you know what, I'm gonna take a little bit of time, let myself catch up, uh, so that I know I have a longer one coming up in the later year. Because I'm running Boston in the spring, so I was thinking I kind of backcasted. So if I looked at Boston and realized what the next few months were going to look like, I knew I had a little bit of time to play with. So I was like, let's allow it to settle in, get a little more comfortable, and then we'll pick it back up. So, like last week, I just started getting some workouts back in, nothing too spicy, a little bit of tempo effort, a little faster stuff, kind of just letting the legs get reclimatized to running faster. But certainly taking that time to let everything slow down for a second, I feel is one of the keys for me in overall consistency of the year. Like we talk about how you structure a week. I don't run every single day at 100%. That would last not very many days. But if I focus on that periodization throughout the year, throughout the week in this conversation, that translates to how I look at the month, how I look at the year, where it's like I'd much rather have a long, consistent cycle. And if that means I need to take a few extra days after my marathon, then that's really where it comes for me. Where can this help my overall length and consistency of the upcoming training cycle?
And Matt, it seems like the longer the training cycle, or even the more intense the training cycle, the more you want some of that extra time off at the end of the season. Is that
No,
fair?
totally fair. I feel like that's how I know I ran a really good cycle is when you get right towards your taper and you really are excited for the taper and you're like, I'm kind of looking forward to a little bit of time off, a little bit of mental space to step away from running. I think it keeps you fresh and excited about what you want to do. Just giving yourself a little bit of distance to really appreciate it.
And that really highlights not only the physical recovery that's
Mm.
needed after a season, but the psychological recovery. And I remember that very viscerally from cross country season in particular when I was competing at the collegiate level, because the cross country season was the longest season because you really started training in June, and then you had your summer base training where the goal was really just mileage and good long runs and maybe doing some hills and tempo
Mhm.
work, but not really getting too far into the intensity side of things. And then you would have a very intense September, October, most of November. And by that point, I was just ready to sit on the couch and not really do anything. And I did not want to look at a
No.
track for a very long time. And I think not giving the mental side of things the space that it needs is a big mistake when it comes to
Mhm.
planning an off season, when it comes to your rest and recovery after a season. So
Mhm.
you've had this good season, then you take some time off. I think you took 3 weeks
Mhm.
off of running
Just chilling.
entirely, and then you got back into some easy
Mhm.
running. Now that you're getting back into some easy running, do you consider this your off season, or are you like early base training? Like, and I know we're just playing with semantics here, but like, how do you
Mhm.
define things?
And I think that, like we were saying earlier, that off season's a pretty hot topic. It's a very hot button word right now. But a good way to switch that like we're using semantics here, obviously, but let's go for preseason. Call this your preseason, I think. And for me, right now, I know that I have a very strength-based marathon coming in the spring. Boston favors a strong runner. And so, right now, I'm using this opportunity. I'm starting to build up some mileage, building up some strength. We're starting to run a little bit of hill work, nothing crazy, but I am like my balance between running in the summer and my time in the gym is now getting a little more evened out. Where if I think like I have so much time in the week, like if I use up my kind of like pie graph, if I have so much time in training in the week, that ratio of how much time is in the gym versus how much time is out on the roads right now, that is looking a lot more even because if I'm not running as much, I'm like, all right, now is the time to really capitalize on this availability where I can spend more time in the gym. I can actually focus on getting strong right now before the mileage demands of the marathon are up here. Because when the mileage demands of the marathon are high, obviously we're still always going to prioritize our strength training, but that just affects the amount of like just how much time and energy I have in the week and how efficient I can be with that. So now is the chance I can really get that strength up before the mileage comes up. So taking,
Matt, can I
of
interrupt you real
course.
quick? I would love to just highlight this because I think it's super valuable, but I don't want folks to think that you're barely running and you're spending 6 days a week in the gym, 3 hours a session. And so I find this to be super interesting because you are essentially periodizing your training in such a way where you are still training almost at the same amount, but the focus is different. So instead of running 110, 120 miles a week, whatever your peak mileage might be, you're probably running 70 miles a week, something like that, which to be
Still
fair is
good.
pretty
Yeah.
easy for you.
And
It's still
still
good
good
mileage.
mileage.
You're still really stressing the aerobic system
Yep.
in a great way. But at the same time, now you're able to actually focus on getting stronger in the
Mm-hmm.
gym. Whereas, and this is the key distinction I want to make, when you're running 115 miles a week in peak marathon training and you're going to the gym, let's say twice a week, are you a little bit going through the motions, not really going for
Mm-mm.
max lifts or one rep max
Not at all,
PRs on
right?
squat and
You're
deadlift?
just th that the demands on the body are too high at that point. Like right now, I personally, I'm going through a big squat build. I'm having fun with my squat. Um, really trying to push a new squat PR, which is crazy. I pulled my mileage back. I've increased my days in the gym, and I've already bumped my squat PR from this time last year, I was putting up 205. This time at the beginning of the month, it was at 225. And last week, I tested in at 245. So, like, seeing how that adjusts, I now know that, like, all right, I'm going to try to keep pushing that overall strength, but knowing that there's like an amount of resources that you can really use. Like when we're in peak mileage, it's more of a maintenance and durability thing. Like how are we maximizing, squeezing all the juice out of the week? How are we complementing our running right now? This is very much complementing my running, but like I think the base is how do we get strong and durable going into the cycle?
Yeah, and I think a good analogy here might be when you're in peak training, your mileage is up, you're getting in a challenging long run, maybe you're doing 2 fast workouts a week. Your other runs, your recovery runs, your base runs, I'm not going to say you're going through the motions, but they're going to look a lot more
Yeah,
slow, for lack of a better word. They're just going to be easy
comfortable.
because you are putting your effort into
Hmm.
those other days. And it's very similar to the way that you approach strength training when you're in peak marathon
Hmm.
training. All of your energy and resources are really going to overall
Hmm.
mileage, your long run, the workouts. And then, whatever you've got left, you're sort of filling in the cracks with just getting in those easy base runs and getting into the gym a couple days a week to lift. But you're not focusing on it the way that you're focusing on those marathon specific
Yep.
days and
You
those
build it like a
workouts.
pyramid. Like the base of the pyramid, like if we do this like hierarchy of needs where it's like the things that are most important is I'm like, all right, I'm prioritizing the long run. I'm prioritizing these workouts. And then it's like I'm stacking each of these things on top of each other. And so like when you look at how you structure your week, where say I have my like a big workout, I like to Monday workout. I know that's crazy. I don't know anybody else who does it, but we really like a Monday morning workout. So I'll do a workout on a Monday morning, and then I lift at like Monday at noon usually. I get like a couple hours between, but that means I'm showing up to that lift pretty tired already. There's already that amount of fatigue that's in the legs. So that is going to affect what your limits, like what your ceiling looks like in the gym that day. And that's totally fine. You just have to be aware of how much you're working with. Like understanding like what we can spend. Really trying to think like, all right, well, if I used this much in the morning, obviously I'm not going to be frustrated when I show up at the gym later and I can't put up huge numbers. But knowing that it's still an essential part of the building block and it's still quality, however, that is very relative to what you did in the morning, what you did recently.
This very much reminds me of a conversation I had with another running coach talking about
Hmm.
pacing and how when you get to be a more advanced runner, it's almost like you're a bike and you just develop more gears.
Yes.
Whereas when you first start running, it's like hard, kind of
Yep.
hard, and
That's
that's
it.
it. And then Matt, you're on a like a 30 speed bicycle at this point. You know the difference between super easy, very easy, kind of
Hmm.
easy, easy, and like everything in
Click, click,
between.
click.
And it very much reminds me of this idea that you can get into the weight room and have a good workout while knowing it was so far under
Hmm.
100%, and that's completely okay.
Absolutely. Yesterday, my strength coach, so I'm a strength coach, but I also have a coach because it's always good to have an extra set of eyes. We were doing, we were working on some deadlifts yesterday. Good trap bar deadlifts, my coach Keith and I, and I was pulling what would be like 75% of my one rep max. So like very manageable efforts. But we were like, what is the goal here? What's the focus? Being aware, like just because I'm not running my mile PR pace doesn't mean that this isn't valuable. It's what's the focus, what's the goal, understanding like I need to exert this specific amount of exertion because this is in service of the greater goal. So we were talking about like this was a time under tension thing. We were doing some nice like slow eccentric deadlifts, really doing that time under tension on the posterior chain. Doesn't mean we're going to go for the heaviest possible thing we can.
Yeah, I love that. And I recently had Keith on the podcast in episode
Yo,
322
Keith.
talking all about yeah, foot health, movement, pronation, supination. He just has a really good head on his shoulders when it comes to thinking holistically about the demands for endurance
Hmm.
runners. So if anyone hasn't listened to episode 322, it's a banger. So
Classic.
Matt, if we are reframing the off season as more of a preseason, it's not time off, it is getting you prepared for the demands to come in the future. Can we have I almost did it again. Can we have a
Haha.
preseason that is either too short or too long? How do you think about how long a preseason is? Obviously, it depends on kind of your schedule and what race that you're going after, but like you can make a mistake here and plan it way too short or way
Hmm.
too long, right?
Well, and again, like there's not just one route to Rome on this for sure. That everybody has very, very different, like, how long does it take you to get fit? How long does it take me to get fit? What does your schedule look like? Um, it's definitely something that we want to look at from that big picture. So, like, say we have a spring race on the schedule. Let's hit that spring race. All right. Look at the calendar. Give yourself enough time where, like, I don't want to feel like I'm going to hit the beginning of marathon training and it's going to be this whiplash effect where I went from moderate mileage, like a little bit of mileage and a little bit of gym time to like wham, big shift. We want to make this a nice soft curve. So making this all a deliberate decision of like, all right, I'm going to take some time like this. I'm going to take some preseason time, get myself fit. Maybe we set some preseason goals. I want to lift at least my body weight in my deadlift. Maybe I want to focus on some lower leg health, see what I can do to increase the load on my soleus, something like that. Increase my 1 rep max for my calf raise. Um, but realizing that we don't want to, just like any other marathon build, undercook or overcook. Try to find that nice Goldilocks zone in the middle. Um, with that, I would say that it definitely comes down to a little trial and error. Because you'll find out that, oh, I did this, like looking back on your cycles, you might have been like, man, I started training for this one a little too late, or I showed up completely overcooked and I trained a little too long for this one. So I would personally look back at some of your successful training cycles, see how long it took you to really feel confident and comfortable in what you were racing. Say it's 14 weeks of specificity. We're going to plug that 14 weeks on to the back of our marathon. All right, let's backcast to where we currently are. All right, so maybe I have 6 weeks of preseason build. Awesome. Let's take a nice week really comfortably, working our way back into it. Let's get some good heavy strength work going through here with some moderate mileage to maintain that aerobic fitness so we don't have to start from zero when we get back into our standard marathon training. And then that balance kind of shifts. So it's not like a on-off switch when we get into our standard training, but more of like that little bit of shift in power and balance.
Yeah, it's like a light dimmer instead of an
Love a
on-off
dimmer.
switch.
Love a dimmer. We want to live in like those shades of gray rather than black and white.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about getting overcooked close to your race. You almost like peaking too early because you started your training too early. You've just been training for too long. And this is certainly something that is possible. I think you can train too long and
Too
just
intensely.
peak too
Yeah.
early
I'd
too
say it's like
intensely. And,
getting
and
that
that's where I
intensity
was
dialed in for the right time.
100%. And that's where I was going with this question was the intensity side of things. I know we've been talking about marathon training, we've been talking a lot about mileage levels, but when it comes to getting overcooked or peaking too early, I tend to think this is almost exclusively an intensity problem. But I would love to hear your thoughts
I
on
mean,
that.
I would totally agree with that. That's why I said it right away, is it's less of a I think you can hold a pretty solid amount of mileage comfortably without overdoing things. Obviously, while we manage all the other low-hanging fruit, we talk about our sleep, we talk about our nutrition, we do everything that keeps the wheels on the bus. But the overtrained, overcooked, showing up to a race where you're feeling like, man, I feel like I peaked 2 weeks ago. As I'm sure there are listeners who have been in that exact position know, when you show up a little overcooked, you never want to do it again. And that usually comes from an intensity thing where we just want to make sure that we are hitting the right amount of intensity at the right point in time where we don't want to be we talk about in training, you don't get fit the minute you run a workout, right? You get fit as you process a workout. So like we want to hit this peak of mileage, this peak of intensity far enough out from our goal race that we're able to taper down and allow that fitness to process. So thinking from that sort of angle, how do we make sure that we hit that peak at the right point? And I feel like I keep using Peter Attia's word on this one, backcasting. I think it's the best way to set up a cycle where it's like, all right, if I need to be peaked at this date, I need to draw back my cycles of periodization from this point. It's like very basic structure of training where it's like I need to make sure that I am hitting this amount of intensity at the right time. So just looking I think a good way to look at it is we look at mileage in the week, but if you look at your intensity of mileage in the week, what was the amount of quality you ran? So not just am I looking like, wouldn't that be nice if Strava had this extra feature where it's like, yeah, I ran 80 miles, but in that 80 miles, how many of these were at uh, threshold or above? So looking at that time in like that time of how much was this quality mileage? How much of this was that higher intensity volume? And that's something that we want to like grow over time, making sure that we're not having these random spikes of intensity.
Yeah, for sure. Because the intensity is not only what is going to peak you too early, but from an injury risk perspective, intensity is where most of the risk
Hmm.
is. I think number one on my list would be fast running, and then it would be building mileage for number two. And that kind of gets back to the fact that you can maintain a certain mileage level pretty comfortably if your body has adapted to it for a fairly long period of time. And the injury risk isn't super high. The risk of overtraining or peaking too early, I don't think is too
Hmm.
high because the intensity just isn't there. And so, anyone listening to this, I think being a little bit more cautious and conservative with the intensity of your training, and also maybe staying away from the middle of the intensity spectrum in the early phases is probably a good idea. And you mentioned that you just got started with some workouts, Matt. You said you were doing some tempo, threshold type
Super
stuff,
light.
and then some short, fast
Hmm.
work. And I noticed those are the two ends of the intensity spectrum. You're not doing 1,000, 1,200 meter mile repetitions at like your 3K race pace, are
No,
you?
and like, do I want to do that right now? Absolutely not. I'm not fit for
Do I
that.
ever want to do
Good
that?
point, good point. But it's like last week I think I ran a 5 mile tempo at like a very moderate adjusted pace. Like for me, 20 seconds slower than marathon. So like I was chilling, which it was just nice I would like if I was running that in the middle of a build, I would say that would be like an up tempo section I'd have on my long run. Sometimes I really like to do up tempo sections where you're like, all right, let's go take it an hour, moderate, where it's not marathon pace, but you're not slouching. And that's really what that tempo felt like. So we're just getting used to, we're reintroducing longer bites. So the mileage is there, but the intensity is still moderated. So the volume we're turning that intensity down a little bit. And then I was running like 400s, short stuff. Um, if you asked me to go run 12s right now at that 400 pace, it would not go well. It would not go well. But taking like these small bites of intensity are great. So one of my goals in the spring is I'm really trying to run a spicy half. I feel like that's going to be a good move for me to try to run something a little short. We can't call a half short, um, but a little shorter, and how that's overall going to raise my threshold, um, which will hopefully play into the marathon. But I was running quarters on the track around what I'm hoping to run the half at. And knowing that I'm like, all right, little bites, little bites. We're staying out of the middle zone, right? We're not spending long periods there yet, but knowing that eventually I'm going to get there. Now, the next time that I head to the track, I might be doing like 600s or eights, but slowly growing that intensity little bits at a time. We don't want to make those big jumps, just like you don't want to make big jumps in mileage, avoiding making those big jumps in intensity as well.
Yeah, and I think it's very encouraging too, Matt, that you're running these 400s at goal half marathon pace, which is not that
Right?
fast. I mean, this is a pace that you're going to be trying to run for I don't know, an hour and 9 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes. That would probably
Be
be
a
a good
great
halftime
halftime.
for you, right?
Love.
What,
I'd
what's
love
the
to run an
goal?
hour and nine. That'd be great.
Nice.
Anything under 70, I'd be super stoked with.
Yeah, like that's a pace that you can run for well over an
Mm-hmm.
hour. So on the one hand, it's somewhat of a sustainable effort for
Mm-hmm.
you. And so to run quarter mile repetitions at that pace, like you said, little bites. And I love that you're practicing this approach that is very strategic and very
Mm-hmm. I got to give a
patient.
shout to my coach on that, Evan Schwartz. Um, that's something that we always talk about is like prescribed intensity. Just because you can run faster or you feel good that day doesn't mean you should, right? It's about like sticking within the plan, doing the work that's prescribed, because there's always a plan to it. It's like so what? You might feel really good today. Awesome. If you finish with like 3 reps left in you, fantastic. That's what we want. That's how you maintain consistency.
Yeah, I mean, I constantly, think I'm Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park. Like, just because you can doesn't
Yep.
mean you should, or you're so preoccupied with whether or not
You
you
never
can
asked.
doesn't mean that you
Hmm.
actually should. Let's talk a little bit more about rephrasing off train or off
Hmm.
season as preseason, because now all of a sudden we are getting ready for the upcoming
Hmm.
season, and that really changes the mindset of the athlete. And it seems like one of the major goals of this preseason phase of training is either working on a weakness or working on a specific physical goal
Hmm.
that is going to be required of you in your upcoming season. So for you, Matt, you're getting ready for the Boston Marathon. It's a very strength oriented marathon. Stronger runners are going to be better at Boston. So you're working a lot on strength
Yep.
training right now. What are some of the other types of weaknesses that runners can potentially work on in the preseason? Because the way I look at it is it's either strength, endurance, or even speed. And depending on who you are, you could have a pretty good
Hmm.
preseason where any one of those is the focus.
Totally, totally. And if we look at it like a lot of the times, I'm gonna steal this from my coach. People get stuck in a cycle of chronic marathoning. Say they do the same thing all the time, and your body adapts really well because what does the body do? It recognizes patterns. We train, we adapt. Ah, fantastic. That's how we accrue fitness. That's how we get faster, is that we introduce stress, the body adapts to it, and we get better. Now, eventually, you introduce the same stimulus over and over, you're going to get those diminishing returns. Where if I've been running the same thing over and over and over, eventually it's like, all right, well, I feel like I've squeezed all the juice out of this one. You're going to slowly, like, you're not going to be getting as many of those big returns. So, using this preseason as a chance to get that new stimulus, to get something new in the system where let's say it's speed. Say we are an aerobic monster where like if I put you out there, you can run all day and feel super comfortable. Fantastic. We love that. So let's introduce a shorter speed block. And with that, let's introduce some big strength where we're going to be like, all right, I want to see you moving heavyweight fast. I want to start to see what your plyometric work looks like. I'm going to see this over on the track as well. Let's see how this translates into like some of the shorter stuff that you don't work on. Because what is it? It's said principle, right? Specific adaptations to impose demands. If you are someone who's really good at aerobic work, you've probably done a lot of aerobic work, and don't want to lose that. That's the base we're going to build everything off of. But you have these other pillars that can build you into an even better, more well-rounded runner. So if your limiting factor is the speed, let's take that preseason as a chance to pick up this like part of your house that's lacking. If it's your say it's our endurance, say we struggle with our threshold work. Some people really like struggle in that mid zone where you're like, hey, I feel pretty good on the track for my 400s and I feel great on my long runs, but if you throw me in like a 4 mile aggressive tempo, I feel like you go really quickly. So it's like, all right, let's spend some specific time in your preseason focusing on that. Let's get some breathing work going with this as well. Um, Taking these little steps to use the preseason rather than like, yeah, we want that mental break like we discussed earlier. Yeah, we want the physical break at the beginning, but then how can we show up at the beginning of our next season differently? Because if we just repeat the same thing over and over again and we get the same results over and over again, that's just like confirming what we've already done. But using that preseason as a chance to work on one of those little spots, because you're not going to be able to have this flexibility when you're in the trenches of your race training. Use the preseason to really hone in on what that thing is for you. Like my preseason right now, I'm really trying to pick up some of that higher speed training. So it's been big, heavy lifts. It's that shorter hill work. It's 400s. It's like smaller things that I'm not going to focus on as much when I'm running the marathon.
Yeah, this is great. I think too that one of the reasons why I love talking to you, Matt, is that like I'm sure we could record a 4 hour, highly philosophical podcast on how runners should think about training
Mm-hmm.
and all that, and would have a little cup of coffee with our pinkies up, and it
Ooh.
would just be wonderful. Let's get super specific. One of the things that you are working on right now is
Mm-hmm.
strength. So you are trying to lift more in the squat. That is a very specific application
Mm-hmm.
of your preseason
Yep.
goal. I'll use another example from myself. You know, I struggled with aerobic development because I got injured so
Mm-hmm.
much. So one of the things that I did in my preseason for cross country during, my most successful season was I had a long build where I didn't have to rush my mileage. I did more strength training and a little bit of barefoot strides and drills, which I
Mm-hmm.
think specifically for me really helped. And I really focused on staying healthy in the long term. And then not only did that allow me to run mileage levels that I had never touched
Mm-hmm.
before, but I was also doing 2 to 3 hours of cycling and pool running
Mm-hmm.
every week. And so, I was getting in 85 miles a week, 3 hours of all this cross training. Plus, I was doing barefoot strides and strength training, and I was even doing some barefoot drills. And I started that cross country season feeling so strong and unstoppable that I was like, why didn't I do this before? I should have taken less time off from running at the very beginning and instead just started getting into some of those lower mileage
Mm-hmm.
weeks, which are the foundation for the moderate mileage weeks, which are the foundation for the high mileage weeks. And it's that little bite at a time approach which finally enabled me to stay healthy and have the best season
Mm-hmm.
that I could. And so for me, it was a long build. It was a fair amount of barefoot work. I did a lot of
Mm-hmm.
hill circuits as well, just constantly getting used to running uphill, downhill. I think really helpful for my strength and injury resilience. And then a little bit of strength training and cross training. And I was so strong. And so I'm curious what other very specific areas to focus on, or even just very specific training strategies you might have in mind for some of these preseason
Like
goals.
this is something that um, Keith and I love to talk about. That we think about the funnel, right? The funnel is you put in training and out comes fitness. But for a lot of people, something starts to leak. And like maybe it's your durability and little leak starts to come out. And in a perfect world, training equals fitness. It's a very simple this equals this. The time plus this equals fitness. Now, when you're saying you're like, I want to be able to handle more, because obviously more training can equal more fitness. It can. But the caveat is you have to stay healthy. So, how do we reinforce this funnel, the tube, from training into fitness? And so it's like, all right, how do I increase my durability so that I can handle more mileage? How can I increase this so I can handle more intensity, so that I can handle more training, whatever it happens to be? So my like my weak point in my funnel for me usually is my lower leg. Um, I have got, I've never had like, I know a lot of runners that are like, man, I have this problem in my hamstring or I have this problem in my glute. You can't really see me on the screen right now, but I've got really strong glutes and hamstrings. Those have never been an issue for me. I'm really durable with that. But my weak point is my lower leg. And so if we look at running forces, the greatest amount of running force is concentrated in that lower leg. So my big focus now is to make sure that my lower leg can handle the demands of the training that is going to come. So I'm doing, we've been doing a lot of work where it's like these long isometric holds under huge amounts of weight. I'm using a belt squat. I'm putting on, so I'm like holding all this weight, focusing it on my midfoot, really trying to strengthen my midfoot stance. I'm trying to think, what is the point? And I got to really credit Keith again for this, that we think about where am I the weakest and where do we see the biggest amount of structural collapse in my running? And it's like at that mid stance, which is pretty true for almost everybody, that that's where you're going to have the most amount of force on you, is right at that bottom of your running stance. When I say mid stance, it's that point when like I'm fully compressed going through my stride before I'm about to take my next step. And if we look at that, how do you, to use Keith's phrase, own mid stance? So for us, that big part has been, let's increase the strength of your lower leg, because that's my one thing that really, like, if I have trouble in a cycle, it's like, ah man, my calf is going again. I'm having this. So if you have like a reoccurring injury, let's get super hyper specific on what is the injury. And usually it's like just like the load management of that specific area. Like, do you have consistent lower leg pain at some point in your cycle? Well, it means that you've like reached your saturation point for that tissue. So how do we increase the ceiling? Let's train that one thing, and we're going to really load it and load it and load it. And we're going to get it so now where your ceiling used to be here at this amount of mileage and intensity, bam, now it can handle way, way more. So for me, that's been my big specific training, is I'm trying to increase, like we said with the squat, so I'm increasing the amount of power and strength I can push in single reps. Along with that, it's complemented really well with long isometric holds in my lower leg. I also have a little bit of adductor issue every so often, so I've been focusing on my adductor, holding these for longer periods of time, where if I can manage all this extra load, like holding like 150 pounds, cool. That begins to translate into the demands of running. And we're just going to continue to grow that so that we're essentially bulletproofing this very specific part.
Matt, let me switch gears a little bit and ask you, when it comes to your preseason, is there a period of time where you're in that preseason where you're either thinking to yourself, okay, I need to get my mileage and workouts back up to where they need to be, or do you put all of your sort of your eggs in one basket and just say, you know what, we're just going to patiently continue this build? You know, I know you said it's not like switching a light, but I'm curious just like how long of a time you spend in this phase before you're like, I'm getting nervous, I want to get back to my full training.
I it's definitely challenging because I feel like it changes from year to year. There's definitely not like a hard and fast rule. I try to be in this zone for about like 6 to 8 weeks for me, knowing that that's enough time to actually see some strength gains. Like we talk about like strength and hypertrophy, you won't see changes in 2 weeks. That's fine. I love good 2 weeks of work, but it's not enough time for the adaptation. It's just the muscular system doesn't work like that. So I like to go for like 6 to 8 weeks of a very specific build. Like I'll still get good work done in 4 weeks. But if I want to like see this cycle through to its completion, I find 6 to 8, and then we're gonna start changing this, and we're gonna start like, all right, I'm gonna turn down some of the stress in the weight room, still keeping it there, but I'm gonna turn up the stress in my running. Like we said, it's a dimmer, not a light switch. So I think that 6 to 8 week mark. So I'm coming up on that now. What is it? It's November 1st today. So I'm thinking, all right, I know I have a race personally in the first week of December, a little 4 miler, see how it goes. But in that, I know that the week that I'm in currently, my running it's going to start picking up this week. And that's timing out with today. I'm going to see where this squat's at, knowing that like I'm not going to be able to push that to its potential when I just ran like a huge workout in the morning. It just won't work out very well for me.
When you think preseason, do you think this is a time period of running low mileage, or do you think it's a time period of gradually increasing your
That's
mileage?
that's the difference. And this is the time period. Don't think about this as like buying in low and staying low, but think about this as like you said, I don't want to go light switch. You didn't want to, if you look at your cross country season, if I can manage like a slow increase, each one of these, it's all about like progressive overload. I'm gonna stack it up a little bit at a time. It's not just I'm gonna buy in at 30 miles and stay at 30, but like okay, I'm gonna start here, and then each one of these weeks I'm gonna build on it and build on it. Now, I might not be building as aggressively as I do during my full tilt run season. However, I'm definitely still keeping an eye on where that is at and intentionally turning up the heat.
Yeah, this I think is one of the crucial distinctions between your stereotypical off season that I see talked about a lot, especially on social media, and what we are talking about
Mhm,
now. Because this preseason or off season or base
mhm,
training, whatever you kind of want to label it here, 1 week of preseason is not equal to another week of preseason. In other words, if you look at week 1 of your 8 week preseason, it's going to look very much like a preseason
mhm.
training week. However, if you look at week
It,
8 of your preseason cycle, it's actually going to look more like normal
mhm,
training. So it's this gradual evolution over time of
mhm.
I'm going to go from rest to very easy training to easy training while focusing on some of those weaknesses. And that's going to gradually build
Mhm.
over time. And I think I have this issue with just a low mileage off season phase of training because running ultimately is cumulative.
Yes.
And if we're not building and we're taking 8 weeks of 50% reduction in mileage and we're not really progressing too much within that time period, so much detraining is going to occur that the coach and me just gets super nervous that we are digging a hole that we're going to have to spend a lot of time to dig
And
ourselves
it's going to
out of.
cost you more to get out of it than it did to get in. And eventually, like, I think that if we think about like time is our greatest resource in this, and it's also our most precious resource, because you can't just like find more time. There is a finite amount of time between today and race day. So, understanding how much you have to use, being like, I have X amount of weeks until race day, which means I can only increase so much per week without making this like a large shock to the system. So that informs how, like, where we have to start. That we can't start too low, otherwise, you're in a hole.
I think this is a much more nuanced and more effective way of thinking about our preseason and really what we're trying to do in this phase of training, because ultimately, if we don't know the answer to that question, it becomes very difficult to actually
Mhm.
structure, our training. We've got to know what we're trying to do out on the road, on the track, in the weight room, so that it can be properly structured. Last thing I want to talk to you about, Matt, is time off completely. You took 3 weeks off. I generally recommend a week or
Hmm.
two. I tend to think that you can do whatever you want after a marathon, Matt, because you're running 120 miles a week, and I've seen some of your workouts, and trust me, man, I don't want to be running those workouts next to
You're too
you.
kind.
um, so, like, talk to me about this idea of you're afforded more time off the more strenuous your training is. And almost like not you're afforded more time off, you
You're
need
owed.
more
I
time
think you're
off.
owed more time. And
Yes.
this is something that I feel like I get to have a cool eye on here in Boulder, Colorado, where we're surrounded by so many professional runners who, what's their job? Run very hard. And like some of the people that I see run the hardest also take their time off the hardest, where it's like something that absolutely grinds my gears is when I see someone ran a amazing marathon on a Saturday. Woo! Congratulations. And on Monday morning, they are in a spin class. Something like that. And I'm like, no shade on spin class. However, stress is stress is stress is stress. So take that, like, we'll use the Ron Swanson quote on this one. You never half-ass something, half-ass a few things when you can full-ass something. So full-ass your recovery time. So like when you take that off time, it's not the day to, and I sometimes have to tell myself this, it's not the day to go for, just because I ran a big marathon doesn't mean that the next 2 weeks are my chance to like go for a 150-mile bike ride. I know it's not running. It's not the exact same thing, but it is still stress on the system. So once you've like, if we hit an appropriate cycle where we really squeezed all the juice out of everything we could, allow yourself, like, if that was such a big peak, give yourself that really good valley on the other side where we're going to allow ourselves to come back, to fully recover, to process. Because if we look at, like, even if we look at a race like a big workout, because it is, you want to process all that good work that you just did. How are we going to process that? Proper recovery. That fitness isn't going anywhere. So take the downtime, and then you can actually like turn that around a little quickly into that preseason. So if we did like, say we took like 4 of these like pseudo weeks off, where we're still like doing a lot of work, we're still doing things, we're still exercising hard. Um, you're not able to actually get back into that preseason appropriately because you didn't actually take your dedicated time off. Take the time off. I think it falls under the like easy days easy, hard days hard category, where it's like we don't need to live in this gray middle zone of kind of both things. The marathon, the race was hard. It should be hard. If you're going for a PR, it means you've done something you've never done before. So that should be really hard, which means conversely, take the next few days, relax. I really like when I work with my athletes, I say 10 to 14 days afterwards, no running, no running, just relax and then come back. Um, but if you were able to like actually take that recovery time like you're supposed to, getting back on the horse doesn't feel as bad.
Yeah, and I was admittedly a little bit hesitant to even discuss this aspect of time off because it almost makes it sound like, well, Matt Meyer runs 234 and 110 miles a week, so he can take 3 weeks off, but I've only run a 358, so I'm only allowed a week off. And it's not
No.
that at all. I think it really has to do with squeezing the juice. And that's an analogy you've used a couple times now.
Best.
And it's like, it doesn't matter how much juice comes out. If your orange is dry, you need to take all that time
Mm-hmm.
off. Um, do you think about this time off differently if say your peak race of the season was a 5K?
I would actually. If the peak race of my season is a 5K, and like this comes down to, especially if we're talking about someone who ran 3:58 in the marathon, that's time on feet, friend. Like if we look at the amount of time a marathon takes, doesn't matter if you are Kelvin Kiptum, he still ran 2 hours, and that's still a hard 2 hours that he ran versus a 5K. There's a reason why, if we look at like the professional world of running, why the Diamond League can have consistent meets frequently. And it's why if you're a miler, you're able to take multiple swings at your race. You just line them up every weekend. You know what? I missed my goal this weekend. I got one another week, and then another 2 weeks after that. The marathon is unique in the length and the amount of stress. So, say I'm running a 5K, I don't have to take nearly as much time off because though the training might be excellent and the training is also like its own kind of challenge, the amount of time on feet is just very different. So, like, say you run that excellent PR 5K, that's your A race. Love it. Take a little time as you move into your next season, but realizing that that amount of time on feet is not the same as in the marathon, so you can come back a little sooner.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make because obviously not everyone is a marathoner and the recovery demands are different
Mhm.
based on the race distance. And yeah, I think this is true almost universally. Whereas if you run a 100-mile ultra marathon, take a month off
Mhm.
afterward. Get super
Like
out of
we
shape.
look at Courtney Dauwalter, where she was able to string together multiple record-breaking, incredible runs. And then what did she do? Hard stop at the end. After UTMB, she took a hard amount of time off because of the demand. Obviously, that's a lot of time on feet for those races. That's a lot of time on feet. I don't even. That's like moving out of my area of expertise, where I'm like, wow, that's like so many hundred. I'd have to do more research. But realizing that stress is stress, and you have to take the time off to catch up after a big peak that allows for that good valley.
Matt, this has been one of my favorite conversations. Just talking about all of these different aspects of recovery and base training and
Mhm.
preparing for future training and switching between labeling this time period an off season to a preseason and how that I really don't think that's just a semantic difference. It really prepares you for the challenges of that cycle of training. I think it was just super interesting. Definitely, I think shifted how I think about certain aspects of this phase, and hopefully has given our listeners a little bit more structure that they can put around their preseason rather than their off season. And I think most importantly, it's this idea of even if you're in this off season or preseason, you are still building. It is not just this blank check to run 10 miles a week and you do that for 8 weeks. The next thing you know, you're in this huge fitness hole that you've built for yourself. So thank you so much for shooting. Let me keep this PG for talking some shop with me today
Anytime.
and just getting a little philosophical on
Yeah,
this. I
using
love
that
it.
like that's like I think the big recommendation I'd have coming off of this is like we are so good at setting goals for races. Set some preseason goals. Like use that time. We're not going to end up in a fitness hole, like you said. Use that time to set a like measurable goal for the preseason. Whether that's time in the gym, whether that's maintaining this like base mileage, whatever it is, have something you can check off at the end of preseason in the exact same way that you can check off at the end of a race.
I often talk about training
Yes,
PRs. I love
love
training
training
PRs.
PRs.
Preseason seems to be the time to go after one or two training
Huge.
PRs. I love it. Okay, there we go. Matt, thanks for your expertise and your time today.
Absolutely.
If folks want to follow along with your build, I know I enjoy seeing what you're up to sometimes. Can we find you
Of
on the internet somewhere?
course. You can always find me on Instagram at Matthew Luke Meyer. I'm there. You can also find me in person. I work in Boulder, Colorado at Revo Physiotherapy. I'm a strength and conditioning coach up here. And you can always follow me along on Strava. I try to post witty captions sometimes and occasional memes. So, we're out here having a good time.
I love it. You're having a good time while working super hard. That's the ideal,
Always.
right?
Hard work is good work. You
Thanks,
bet.
Matt.